Today, we take up a new theme, the theme of consciousness, but perhaps it's important to remember where we've come from. We, in the first day, explored the methods of science, of reason, of observation, of experimentation. And we spoke then about the new physics, the implications of the new physics for our view of reality. We spoke about the importance of context and relationship. We also spoke about the theme of connectedness and interconnections that quantum physics, for example, showed us. We spoke about the lack of an intrinsic absolute reality, and that the context allowed for the appearance of phenomena of experience, which then science could work with at every level of subtlety. And then yesterday we spoke about the neuroscience of consciousness, the neuroscience of emotion, of meditation and mental training, the importance of neuroplasticity. And with Tanya, the biology and biochemistry, for example, that underlies also many of the processes of consciousness. And then, of course, we had the Tibetan respondent, Geshe Damdul, who with great energy and vigor challenged the materialist understanding of the brain as the sole basis of consciousness. And so we were prepared, I think, for a wonderful
It seems he disappeared.
He's disappeared. According to the laws of physics, he will reappear. But today we have the great privilege of exploring what is one of the greatest mysteries of all, the nature of consciousness, the nature of the mind. And we have two wonderful helpers in this regard. We have the California Institute of Technology, Professor Christoph Koch, who's a professor of biology and engineering at Caltech. He is also the chief scientist at the Paul Allen Institute for Brain Science, a remarkable new initiative in the Northwest in Seattle. We also have, of course, your friend and colleague Mathieu Ricard, who is known well to you, who studied cell genetics first at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, and after receiving his doctorate there has spent the last 40 years on what he calls sometimes an extended postdoc, an extended continued studies with Tibetan masters in the Himalayas. He has also been an intimate colleague and friend of the Mind and Life Institute for nearly 20 years. So Christoph will begin, and then Mathieu will follow on. So Christoph, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Your Holiness, I have the great responsibility of representing 2,300 years of Western thought on this in 1 hour. This tradition reaches back all the way to the Greeks in Western thought, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, who first thought about this, and then goes on to René Descartes, who's really the modern founder of the study of the mind and the brain, of consciousness, to Charles Darwin and Alan Turing, Albert Einstein, to my own mentor and teacher, Francis Crick. And this tradition has emphasized the empirical and the mathematical. So it uses mathematical logic as well as analysis and the empirical investigation. And so by and large, it's a physicalist, or it is a physicalist way of viewing the universe. So we try to explain everything we can using physics, using energy, space, time, matter. And maybe if we now come to the problem of consciousness, that has not really been the focus of empirical investigation until 20 years ago, maybe we have to enlarge our view of what physical reality entails. But it's this tradition that stresses the empirical querying of nature. You can think about things, but ultimately you have to test them against reality. And your theories, including theories of consciousness, have to be testable. Otherwise, they're not scientific theories. So that's what this approach focuses on. So okay, so I think we should look on this. That screen is dead. On this screen, that screen is dead. That's dead, and this one is it's sort of basically dead. So we just focus on this screen. This really epitomizes the problem of consciousness. What you see is red, and all of us see red. And if you're colorblind, you may see red that's slightly different depending on your exact eyes, the exact molecular constitution of your photopigment in your eye. You might see different, but you see something. And philosophers refer to this as it feels like something to see red. Above and beyond the photon that strikes my eye, that evokes electrical activity somewhere in my brain, there's this feeling associated with it, an experience, a subjective, phenomenal experience. And philosophers refer to this as qualia. So here's a qualia of red. And if I have a toothache, there's a qualia of having a bad tooth. And if I remember my mother, then I have a qualia of remembering my mother and all the positive feelings that go ahead with that. Now, the belief of many, in particular the belief of my mentor, Francis Crick, was that once we understand consciousness in this very simple form, just red or blue or smell, we will have understood the problem of consciousness in general. That all the different aspects of consciousness, including self-consciousness, so the fact that I know I'm a man, I know that I'm angry, or I might be angry, or I might remember what I had this morning for breakfast, that all those different aspects are just higher elaborations upon a basic phenomena of experience. So the problem that we face as scientists is best shown here. So this is my brain. It's an egghead. I'm an egghead, a nerd, and we have elongated brain. So this is my brain in a magnetic scanner. And what I superimposed, it's difficult to see. Well, you can see it nicely on the side pictures. Is the activity, the imagined activity in my brain if I would see red. So I put those those red pixels in there, and they correspond to a part of my brain that would be uniquely active if I see red. Now, in a different part of my brain would be active.
That you mentioned that this is your brain, but then you have written down their third person as it's someone else's account.
Well, so everybody here is looking at my brain from a third person. Okay, so I am a first person. I have an experience. Now, all of you can't see my experience, but you can look at my brain. And you can take a piece of my brain and you can analyze it. You can do biochemistry, and you can put microelectrodes into my brain, as you can do sometimes with patients, and study them. Or you could put EEG, like Richie and his students, you could put EEG on my brain. So all of that is a third-person account, but only I have a first-person account. And the challenge for Western science so far has been to explain how does the first-person account come about. That's the mystery. This is what we call the heart of the mind-body problem. How can physical matter, so my brain is physical matter, is subject to all the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity that we heard about. But nowhere in quantum mechanics or in relativity does it say consciousness. In none of the equation is there consciousness. If I look at the periodic table that you showed, there's nothing there about consciousness. If I look at chemistry, or I look at in my genes, the ATGC, the letters, the nucleotides in my genes, there's nothing consciousness. Yet I wake up each morning into a world that's filled with feelings. And it's not at all clear how feelings come into a physical system. This is the deep mystery. And why other system, this is also a physical system. This one here, it consists also of matter, different than this, but it's also matter, and we don't believe that this thing has feelings. It doesn't feel like anything to be an AM radio. And so the big question is, why does it not feel like something to be a radio, but it feels like something to be a brain, sometimes at least. Not in deep sleep. In deep sleep, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing. Now, I don't feel anything, just nothing. But when I awake, either in my dream, when I dream, or right now, I have feelings. And some philosophers call this the explanatory gap. On the one world is the world of physics and chemistry and biology and brains. On the other world is my world of pains and pleasures and feelings and yearnings and memories. And we know those are linked. We'll talk about that. We know that the world of the brain is intimately linked with the world of the experience. But why and how that is, that has been the big mystery. How the first-person account relates to the third-person account. And what makes this much more difficult than studying stars, studying viruses, or studying quantum mechanics, that we believe those things don't have a first-person account. A star, we believe, doesn't feel like something to have a star, to be a star, or to be a virus, or to be an electron, yet it feels like something to be a brain. All right, so we've often heard about this scientist, this 16th century Italian scientist.
내가 때부터 간다 눕조베 다 천리보다 더주망 속에 다 셰베 땐데 정말 수진이 아니라 다 수진이 교단 레벨 중이 도단되게 그런 지어res 다 주난 거다 용어진이 여러봤어 다 군입으로 튀고게 군이 레벨 간다서 중요보다 텔레텐 피 간다서 중요 다 디셰버잖아 제도고 요마 딘자 탄이 고란레 explanatory gaps 셰베 파르톤스 시절라고 그랬어 대셰게 파르톤스 지금.
So we've heard often about this scientist, one of the fathers of modern science, and the motto that we also use today is, if we can't make something measurable, then we have to make things measurable. So if we study consciousness, we have to develop tools to make them measurable. That's sort of our mantra, or maybe I shouldn't use it, our motto. Well, this is very... So in medicine, in Western medicine and science, we distinguish two different usages of the word consciousness. One is the content of consciousness, and the other one is sort of states of consciousness or level of consciousness. So we were talking about the state of consciousness red. When I see red, my consciousness is filled with red. Or I can have a memory, or I'm hungry, or I have my toe hurts. Those are all different states of consciousness. And we're trying to understand how do they relate to brain states. But then there's also this other thing, level or states of consciousness. Right now we're all wide awake. Nobody's asleep, and we are conscious. And tonight, we close our eyes and we go into different states. In fact, we may wake up inside our sleep, and then we have another state of consciousness, namely the dream state. Or then we can go into deep sleep, non-REM sleep, where we believe there's very little consciousness. And this happens every day, 24 hours. Or there's also pathological forms of states of consciousness. So this is a very famous patient, Terry Schiavo. So she had her heart stood still for 20 minutes, and then she was rescued from the brink of death by the doctors. And then she lived for another 15 years, and she was alive. She had her eyes are open, and then they're closed.
So and then 15 years, 15, 1-5.
15 years, yes. Some of these patients can be alive for as long as 2 decades. So these patients are called vegetative state.
So according to medical sort of...
No, they're alive because their eyes open, close, but they have no, as far as we can tell, this is now more controversial, it doesn't feel like anything to be them. So her, for example, in her case, the EEG was flat. The EEG, it was flat, irregular. And this is her brain at the right side at postmortem. It had shrunk by about half. Now, there are many of these patients. In the United States, they probably estimate between 15 and 20,000 of patients like this that are alive. They have periods when they open their eyes and periods when they close. Sometimes they may, they groan or they move, or sometimes they move their eyes. Sometimes it looks like they're smiling, like there. But there's no way to communicate with them. You can ask the patient, for example, move your eyes if you're in pain, or shake hold my hand, or something. And there's no way to reliably communicate. So we think many, if not all of them, it doesn't feel like anything. The consciousness is gone. Yet there's still enough brain activity left to sustain breathing or to sustain brain reflexes so that she can move and sometimes, groan. So it's important to distinguish the content of consciousness from the levels of consciousness. And the levels of consciousness, we know quite a bit about the brain mechanism. Your brain has to be excited enough in order for the nerve cells in the cortex proper, the cortex and the thalamus to fire in order for you to be conscious of something like pain or pleasure or red or green or smell. So what is it? So I tried, there are many, many speculations in the West on consciousness, many, and I've tried to distill out the facts that we're pretty certain we can say, where we're very confident about these facts. So we know that consciousness is associated with some complex biological networks, in particular brains, in particular human brains. Now, it's not associated with all biological networks. For instance, we all have an immune system. We have several immune systems, an innate one and an acquired one. I'm here in a new environment here in Mundgod, and there are viruses around and bacteria, and my body right now might be busy fighting off those viruses and bacteria. Yet I don't feel anything. I have no feelings in my immune system. So my immune system is working without there being any consciousness. Why? It's a very interesting question that people rarely ask. Why is my immune system not conscious? We don't know. There are, I mentioned this yesterday, my liver, very complex, very complicated metabolic networks. It's not conscious. There are 100 million neurons here in my gut. They don't seem to be conscious. So it's only some particular type of biological networks that seem to be associated, we think, with conscious activity. And the question is why? The immune system...
No.
I do not want to interfere your presentation.
Interrupt.
But since many years, I think most subtle level particle, particle of plant, rocks, brain, same or differences?
At the subtle level, it's probably, yeah.
Panpsychism? Is this what
No.
as
His Holiness is,
panpsychism?
from a purely physical theory point of view, at the subtlemost level, can one say that the material constitutions, the constitutive elements at the fundamental level, is the same between inorganic matters like rocks on the one hand and plants and life on the other?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, obviously, when you say life start much earlier than the consciousness or mind.
Yes.
So the particle, the continuation of our brain's sort of particle, it is called continuation. Ultimately, it's related with those particles which no mind or no consciousness, no feeling. So the most subtle level, no differences. Now, what level? So so-called sort of consciousness to see, I mean, what level can act as a basis of consciousness? Can you make distinction? Plant, no consciousness, because such things is lacking. We, living being, have that kind of particle, so have the ability to develop consciousness. Can you say something?
Christoph.
We can speculate, but the answer is right now no. Now some people, well, let me come back to that. Right now we don't know. We can say my liver is not conscious. My brain is conscious some of the time. That we would say is a fact. Why? We don't know really. We can speculate on it, but we don't really know. We think it has to do with the complexity. And so we think complex system defined in a particular way, the more complex you are, the more there is potential for consciousness. A simple system has maybe little consciousness. A more complex system has more complex consciousness. So this would be like an emergent phenomena. But this is right now a speculation. We don't know for sure.
Consciousness
I mean, there is an ancient, there's an ancient, let me come back to that in a second. We know that consciousness does not require behavior. We know this from patients who are catatonic, or we know this from some patients who've taken a tainted form of heroin, and then they become completely frozen. They can't move at all anymore at Stanford, frozen addicts, yet they're still conscious. We also know this ourselves in our dream state, because our brain, in an attempt to, when you're dreaming, you're running and flying, and if you live in a high-rise in America, that's not good if you act out your dream, because you would jump out of the window. So what the brain does, while it sleeps, it partially paralyzes the body. It's called an atonia, and almost all the big muscles are paralyzed except the eye movements. So the eyes you can move, but everything else is paralyzed while you're dreaming. So that tells us that you can be conscious without having behavior.
Why eye movement, Kachori?
So why the eye movement? That's a kind of an activity.
We don't know. We don't know. It's a good question. The eyes are there. Maybe for other people to read out, we don't know. We know from patients, we heard them, I think Tanya was talking about it, or maybe Richie, some patients who have lost due to an explode, let's say soldiers who come back from veterans who come back from Iraq due to a bomb, they have lost part of their brain that mediates emotions. So they have no affect, they're very flat, their voice, it's not modulated, there's no emotion, yet they're conscious, they can tell you about pain and pleasure. So we know, at least in these pathological cases, that you can be conscious, you can have experiences without having strong emotions. We know that this is more recent, much more recent, but we know that, so yesterday you distinguished different forms of attention, that at least the pointed attention, when I attend to something, when I look at you, but I attend to on the corner of the eye to His Holiness, that this form of attention can be separate from consciousness.
No. Yes, okay.
Yeah, okay. So you can attend to something. So there's many experiments now where people, I'll show one where you can attend, I'll show one this afternoon, where you attend to something without seeing it. So it's invisible. You don't see it, you're not conscious of it, yet you can still attend to it. We believe that you don't need language, and nor do you need self-consciousness to be conscious.
Self-consciousness.
Can you explain what you mean by self-consciousness?
Well, I know that I'm Christoph, and I can have a higher order thought. I can say, I'm now having a conscious experience. Yes. I'm now talking to His Holiness.
Yes, okay.
So the point you're making is animals don't have self-consciousness? Is that the point you're making?
Well, one consequence is most animals have very little self-consciousness. But a dog is conscious of joys and pleasure and pain without having a lot of self-consciousness. The dog doesn't sit there and say, my tail wags in a funny way. My dog just is in the present and doesn't have a lot of self-consciousness. It might have some very little thing. So I think self-consciousness is just an evolutionary elaboration of consciousness reflecting upon itself. Matter becoming conscious and then reflecting upon itself.
이 가족이 중살된다. 안도 전주 류식도 안에 선인도 이식도 안에 잠바르식도 안에 도순시라디. 이 컨시스턴스.
So yesterday we had this discussion about whether the presence of self-regulation in an animal, whether one can speak of it, and His Holiness gave the example of animals who have a certain experience in the past and now act cautiously, although they want to eat something. Isn't that
so sensory level want something, very very eager, but mental level, remember, some of the past was experience. So cautious. Sensory.
So
that's not a purely sensory process.
No, no, you're correct. It's memory, but it doesn't have to be an explicit memory. You can.
Self-consciousness.
So you are suggesting that that's not a self-conscious.
No, you can condition people so people can be fearful of something without knowing quite why. You go in a dark room and you feel very uneasy, but you don't know why. You may not have an explicit conscious memory. You can condition people without them being conscious of what they're being conditioned. So that's different from self-consciousness.
강의 스텝을 봐. 강의 스텝이 그 도선체의 템베뇽한테 인지미지 병가르 때 중사든지 템베베 뭐스고예요 말해서 그 슈겐 너버 샤제 안 당선시해 준 걸. 빼는 몇 강만 나고 난
I think this is like dog. Is some food. Which you see they feel some kind of cautious. Then someone, a person, the dogs have very good sort of relations. Then that same sort of food, take that person and give, I think may accept. Do you want that?
So imagine a situation where there is dog sees the food, but it's very cautious, it's not approaching. Then
so they have some sort of the capacity, still not very sure. Then someone, the dog, fully trusted, pick up that food and give. I think since you see the dog trusted that person, so may take.
But that doesn't require self-consciousness. That can be accomplished without self-consciousness.
Self-consciousness 거예요.
That is self-consciousness 말고 안다 미디고 이지 여러 데 기대.
일단 consciousness that to do self-consciousness 시분용용을 스타트를 tutento.
Okay. You can have the situation of a patient who has been, let's say, mugged, who has been robbed at gunpoint in a dark parking garage. It may well be some of these patients now or people.
그래서 결혼 아직 세도. 쉬쉬.
I don't want to take too much time, but just about, since we're talking about animals, I just want to say something a little bit better than the dog and punishment. There's a story with dolphins that were trained to clean the pool in which they were. So to train them, they would give them a fish as a reward for bringing a piece of cardboard that was down. So they found that each piece of cardboard bring one fish. So one dolphin, he delayed gratification by hiding the cardboard under a rock and breaking it into 3-4 pieces, and he will bring each piece to get a fish. So first he had to delay gratification, and he had to realize that if he was breaking one into 4, he will get 4 fish. So that seems to be quite a lot of self-reflection. And then the other dolphins start to do the same.
So there's no question animals are very complex. and some animals do have some forms of self-consciousness, but that's different from saying you must be self-conscious in order to be conscious. Right? So here the claim is you can be conscious of something like red without necessarily being conscious of I am Christoph Koch having a conscious experience of red.
간다 마부통 영화 중발라. 근데 내 마부통 것도 삼패된 영화도 거예요 말했어. 들으셔.
We know from experiments done at my university.
남 유께서 열다. 시고그 마부통 삼시 전야죠. 데 마부통은 내가 우리 마부 영수 영화지 마부통 내걸로 영수 영화지 매는 용어를 썼다. 정주 주약지.
So this reminds is also saying that
맞다. 근데 그것이 뭐랬어요?
so there is a debate in the Buddhist epistemological tradition about
No, not necessary to explain that. Now, simply, you see, while we see something, at that moment, no conscious, right? I'm knowing, I'm seeing that. But later, you reflect, right?
You
remember?
Yes.
You can recall the experience.
So, 나 통연 이걸이야 통지걸로 양수 많이 오나 쉬고 정말 말이야. That's why.
So the argument here is that
저 땅에 할 때께 줘다. 잠바지와를 연구를 고 말해.
So the argument is that when you see the red and later you are able to recall that experience, I saw the red. The argument here is that unless that experience of seeing red has been somehow registered, there is no possibility of recall.
So any memory, you see, 가서다 one condition 양수 연구를 시도하고 시작을 했습니다.
So can you say that in order to have a recall possibility, a memory of something, recollection of something, is it necessarily the case that you have to have the prior experience of that? So in other words, to be able to remember that you saw red, do you have to experience red, seeing red?
Well,
잠바지와를 영원으로 로고 그 말해서 어때?
some people, of course, insist in having false memories, right? They insist they saw something which never took place, yet they're not lying. So
지금 메모리 아니냐? 자,
there are many cases where you can have
No, we're talking about valid
well,
cases of
yeah.
memory.
So then you need to have something has to register it.
Yeah.
But my iPhone, this iPhone takes pictures and remembers it, and we don't think this iPhone has self-consciousness. So I don't see why you should have.
대 conscious 이렇게 시작입니다.
Yeah, we're not
conscious
talking about
image.
consciousness. We're talking about conscious beings. In order to be able to recall a particular experience, do you need to have that experience first?
Yes.
고레스.
How else can you recall it
고레스.
if it's a valid one?
Yeah,
Yes.
그렇죠.
자자가 대통령 시바디 디크도데 네 통사바지 네 시바디 연구요 시바디 깨요 사바지 그도데 매나야 뭐부터 라 유디 통에 견체니 유전디 연구도가
So in that case, when you remember seeing something, say red, and when you recall the experience, not only do you actually recall the content of your experience, which is red, but you also recall the experience of seeing.
and also nature law. I saw that.
Yes.
I'm seeing that. So without I, 가서 separately 시작합니다.
That is. So you cannot speak of a separate instance of a recollection of the subjective experience, independent of recollection of the content of that experience.
Well,
자상 내 통스 그러잖아요. 그 간다 통식을 로디 가서 대단 제고도.
That is. Because you tell yourself, yes, I saw that. So you actually qualify that recollection with the first person, I, which is the subjective.
But you can be fully in the flow. So when you're in the flow, what we call in the West flow, there's probably a Tibetan term for it. When you, for example, when you're climbing or you're biking at high speed through traffic here in India, very dangerous. You constantly have to look out. You're conscious of many things, right? But you may not recall most of them because they happen so quickly. You constantly have to adjust and bike around in the traffic. So you're conscious of them, but experiments show you don't remember most of them later on.
저도 낭서도 참고를 쓰고 말이죠. 나는 작다.
So, but that's not a problem because it's also saying that actually we, have a separate term for those experiences which says that inattentive perceptions. So you
But
perceive
they're conscious.
them. They're conscious.
But
Yes,
they're
they're
Conscious
conscious.
there.
They're conscious. Conscious.
All right, so
Just because
that's-
it's a conscious experience does not mean you can necessarily recall them. But it's the other way.
So that means that consciousness does not require language nor self-consciousness. That self-consciousness some.
So he's
Yes.
the Quran go mares.
다 고말에서 걸어.
Go
아주 느시바 냠스 용두잖아요. 냠스 용두 그래서 나 sometimes.
Quran 인지미지 10배 용어 여바 잠을라 네버도야 용원 대용 얘기 리번니베 랑릭 소리지 고에면도스.
Okay, good.
Now, I must add, there's a tradition in Western philosophers who also, I think, probably closer to you, have what's called higher order theory. So they believe you can only be conscious if you are conscious of being conscious. And they say that is a key step. You have to be conscious of being conscious. Otherwise, consciousness doesn't exist. As an empirical scientist, I'm very skeptical because I can just be in front of a yellow, red, and experience pure red without knowing that I am observing.
No job tatu ma zunale trilamye yores. The Quran to tseribe ton de chebena. Go mintus kansa mabu ton wala nge mabu tongu tu sam goyo maros. Mabu ton nyawa kebala. Nge mabu tongu tu se yujen Quran nge go eske mintus.
그래서 다른 게 있어야 쇼마부 통해 챙거로다. 자상은 냠스 원용 챙겨 말했어. 그래서
So then the question is, this person who saw the red is later, if he or she is later able to recall seeing red, then there has to be some faculty of some kind that has registered that experience to be able to recall the experience, because you don't recall the content independent of the experience.
That's correct. But the question, does that involve the self? Does that involve knowing that I experience?
소울리고래.
말해. That the in에 temporary 두가려야 인지민지 뭐부 통도 걸려야 아니 마부 통도 걸려 내 마부 통도 삼고가 아요나스 통에 내고 다가나네 마음을 temporary 벌라.
Shall we let him?
되더래. Yes.
Maybe we move on to the next point
Sorry.
you'd like to make?
Sorry. 나도 신다.
No.
And so Richie reminded me there is one totally separate memory system that works without consciousness at all. It's called procedural. There's one very famous patient called HM who lost a part of his brain, the hippocampus, and for his remaining 30 years of his life could not remember any specific episode. So you met him, you talked to him, you said, how do you do, how are you, he said, fine, you walk out, you come back in. Again, he has no memory of it. You can do this 10 times, there's no memory. Yet he can learn certain things, like he can learn to write in a mirror. You can train yourself. Leonardo da Vinci did this, that you write like you write in a mirror. So he could learn that. He could learn certain other motor procedure, complex sequences of motor activity, yet he had no idea that he'd learned that. Yet his brain performed better and better. And so we call this procedural memory. How to bike, how to play tennis, how to sit in a particular pose. Those things, it turns out, you can learn fully without being conscious of having learned them. But that's different from remembering specific episodes in our life. That's episodic memory versus procedural memory.
And that includes learning emotional forces.
그래도 쟤도 장바로.
말 temple 링이 제제.
그래. Does not require long-term memory. True. Consciousness can occur in one
hemisphere. Half a brain.
brain can이 어와.
그래.
초 지부 맞으면은 되게 어렸어. 네가 참고하면서.
전이가 참고를 했어요.
참고고 말했어.
So these are experiments in which
Yes.
people cut, surgically, and you only have half a
Yes.
brain, and patient can still be consciousness. And you don't need memory, as we talked, long-term memory, in order to be conscious. Now, most interesting from a brain science point of view if you lose specific parts of your brain, not your heart, not your liver, not your kidney, but you lose specific parts of your cerebral cortex, you lose specific content of consciousness. So you might not be able to see color, you might not be able to see motion, you might not be able to recognize your spouse of 30 years because you've lost the feeling of familiarity. Those things, feeling of familiarity, seeing reds, those are all coded in particular parts of the brain. So this part of the brain seems to be closely involved in color perception, this one in memory, in conscious feeling of familiarity.
These two software memory.
So those cannot be restored once.
We really don't know the extent to which they can.
Yes, extent.
If it occurs early in life, if it occurs earlier in life, it's much more likely to be able to be restored.
Now, we come to consciousness in animals. So this is two conscious mammals. One is my daughter, okay, and the other one is her dog, a German Shepherd, her beloved dog, Tosca. So why do we think that both are conscious? Well, most importantly for me as a brain scientist, if I look at the brains of Homo sapiens and of Canis family, if I look at the dog brain and the human brain, a little bit of brain, you know, if I take a little piece of brain tissue, like a grain of rice, and look at a human brain, a mouse brain, a monkey brain, it looks all very similar. The neurons look the same, the synapses look the same, the genes overall are similar. Nothing is exactly the same, but they're all very, very similar. The big difference is our brain is roughly 1,000 times bigger than the brain of a mouse. It's 20 times bigger than the brain of a dog. But of course, dolphin brains, you mentioned dolphins, are bigger, and blue whale has a brain 3 times as big as a human, which is a little bit embarrassing for us neuroscientists, because we think we're on top, and so to explain why the whale brain, actually, although it's bigger, it's not as clever as we are, it's not easy. So at the level of mechanism, it seems to be very similar, and the main thing that differs is size. And so this is a very powerful argument for why we think, I mean, if the brain is so similar, why should only one species, humans, have consciousness, but not other species? The second reason is behavior. Dogs behave, they're not like us, they don't talk, but a baby doesn't talk, right? A very young baby doesn't talk, and a patient who has a stroke doesn't talk, but we think they're both conscious. And dogs have a variety of ways to communicate their internal emotions to us. They wag their tail, they move their eyes, they move their snout, they can bark, they have different kinds of bark. So there are many ways we can communicate with these guys, which is why we love them. And so it's strange, and it's always, so I grew up as a Catholic, and even as a young boy, I always asked my father and the priest, I said, I don't understand, why is dog not going to, if my dog died, and I said, my dog is going to paradise, surely, right? I'm going to meet my dog up in paradise. I said, well, no, actually not. Paradise is only for humans. And I've always found that strange, because whatever we are, we're all nature's children, and we're so similar. We evolved from each other. We're not the same, but we're all very similar. So, which we see every day in the laboratory, how you see how animals are related at all levels. So I think this is not a very difficult argument for biologists in the West. It's a much more difficult argument to get across in the West, the general public, because we believe in human exceptionalism in the Christian Judean tradition, and many still believe that we have a soul and that those guys don't have a soul. And René Descartes was very explicit. He said he said if you hit a dog with your carriage and it yelps, it reacts, it has a reflex, but the dog does not suffer pain. He wrote this very explicitly.
Descartes dungus labiores tundulia sheba yomares dunga nyongu yomares ke jabamata. No, I think John John presented that. John showed the machine.
Now, the question is, what about other animals that are not mammals, like dogs or cats? What about a bee? Okay, this is the bee. They're all female, most of them, almost all of them. They're very industrious. They can dance. They can recognize individual faces. They have a very complex way to communicate. They can find, they have very complex behavior where within 3 days they can find a new house. Humans takes a year and discussion with your spouse and lots of fights to find a house. But bees, 300 scouts can find a house without fighting. They do this dance. For 3 days they dance and then they pick a new home.
참부치제 니마 숨 나올 것도 상사버치 제 두고 그랬어. 미네 강버제야. 저거도 지면 도로 잘해시 유저전 담에 다시를 치고 걸어왔어.
And this is the brain of a bee. So a bee is much smaller. A bee has only 1 million neurons. We have roughly 100 billion, 100,000 times more. But it's very complex. This is the visual, they see very well. And the complexity of the brain is, in fact, 10 times more complicated circuitry than the average mammalian brain. It's very complex. They have complex behavior, they have complex brain. So I would say we are not sure whether it doesn't feel like something to be a bee. And maybe when a bee goes, to the flower and gets the golden nectar, maybe it feels like something to be a bee. Maybe it feels a little bit of happiness. So in the warm sun, it experiences too its moment of conscious sensation. Now, we don't know this right now, and we don't find it. People have thought actually about tests of consciousness at the level of bees and flies. So this raises a question, what we in the West known as panpsychism. There's probably a term for it in
panpsychism. Pansla도 잡침부 쓰리다. 잡침부. pan스. the shepherd 잡침부 보지. 릭만 보실래요?
That maybe, and this is pure speculation at this point, maybe any biological creature that has a brain is conscious, like a worm or fly. We don't know right now. We simply do not know. Most people say, oh no, it's a bug, it can't be conscious. But that's just an intuition. Also, like most people think a whale is not a whale is a fish, right? A whale swims in the water and smells like a fish, so it's a fish. But we know a whale is a mammal. It's not a fish. So maybe these guys are conscious. It's something that people begin to think about, scientists begin to think about now. So what do people do today in the laboratories who study consciousness? They're looking right now for the correlates of consciousness in the brain. So you have an experience of red. So you try to ask a question experimentally with scanners, like Tanya and Richie showed, with magnetic scanners or with microelectrodes in humans and in monkeys that are trained, to pull levers, which part of the brain is involved in giving rise to the color red. And we're looking for mechanisms. And for example, Tanya's father, who's also a very famous neuroscientist, Wolfsinger, believes that that I believe you've met him.
Yes.
Believe that synchrony, oscillation, the fact that neurons fire together is critically involved, is one of the correlates of consciousness. And it's controversial. There are many different ideas right now, but that's what people do in the lab. That there's real scientific progress. That rather just philosophers sitting around and talking about consciousness, we can now go in the lab and test and disagree and have vigorous empirical debates about which part of the brain is more important for consciousness. For instance, we know that there's this little brain, the cerebellum, at the back of my brain, which contains most of the neurons in the brain are contained in this little brain. Now, if you lose this little brain because you have a stroke or a tumor there, you're going to talk very funny. You get ataxia, you walk like you're drunk. You can't dance, you can't climb, you can't do coordinated motor activity anymore. Yet people, by and large, do not complain about loss of consciousness. They don't say, oh, suddenly I don't see the world in color anymore, or I have no more experience of emotion. So for instance, we have to understand why is this part of the brain not involved in consciousness, but this part is. So this is where most of the empirical research takes place today. So this raises the belief that most, I would say all physicalists have, that you ultimately you need a brain, or if we are more general, you need some mechanism. There has to be some physical substrate necessary for consciousness to occur. We cannot conceive right now how in the absence of a brain, of a brain or maybe a physical mechanism, you can get consciousness. I mean, for us, we think that's invalid. We think that cannot happen. If you have no brain, or if your brain is dead, if your brain is totally shut down electrically, no more electrical activity, we think then you cannot have consciousness. No brain, never mind. Now, I understand in the Buddhist tradition that that's slightly different. And I guess you'll specifically talk to this point. And so maybe we should just leave it until you come. No brain, never mind. Now, I have 2 more slides. I wanted to come to an important, so in Western tradition, we'd like to look at a phenomenon like consciousness and then generalize it. In a sense, in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, we will understand the correlates of consciousness. We will know whenever you're conscious of a pain or blue, you have some neurons, let's say, that oscillate in this part of the brain that do something. Right? So we've just like we found the neural correlates of illness or the neural correlates of bacterial infection, it's bacteria, we will find the correlates of consciousness in the human brain. We will. The only question is how long will it take us and how complicated will it be? Is it going to involve the entire body? Is it going to involve, the autonomic nervous system? But ultimately, we will know the answer that whenever the brain is in this state, whenever these neurons fire, let's say at 40 hertz, you will be conscious. But then you can step back and say, well, all right, it's fine, but why 40 hertz? Why not 30 oscillations per second? And why not?
그러니까 이 그런 저 이제 제들이야. 다 로카 주고 있는 machines. 다들 쉐브 용어죠. 용어 좀 깨야지. 티게베 네 레벨 남주 카레스. 라베나 남시 찔이야. 샤도 그래서 뭐도스. 다이는 직전은 디리디 쉐베 내갑 자마이 뭐 내갑들이야. 자와 베나 지금 로그 파르세디기디. 네 수주도 10주도 되고 장도 용식으로 봤어. 다들 내가 직전은 접어주지. 다 숨주 가야 용어 get to ship 같은 숨주만하는 게 뭐도 윤생가르스 저것도 단다 대대 그래서.
And so ultimately we want to understand why brain, why not my liver? I want to understand what is special about this that this doesn't have. And ultimately in the West we care a lot about machines. We love machines, we build them. I'm a professor of engineering. Ultimately we want to ask, is it possible that in the future this thing can be conscious, that it may feel like something to be an iPhone, probably very glorious feeling. Or the internet. So if you look at the computer today, the internet as a whole, it begins to rival the complexity of the human brain, just in terms of transistors and the wiring. And so it's a legitimate question to ask, well, in principle, could the internet be conscious? Could it feel, what we mean by that, could it feel like something to be the internet? And when you turn the internet off, it doesn't feel like anything anymore. Is this possible? People say, well, that's science fiction. Well, but technology expands very, very rapidly, and we will experience in 10, 20, 30 years creatures, robots that will talk to us and interact with us. And so at some point, their brains, their computer chips will be so complex that it raises a legitimate question, is it conscious? And so to answer all those questions, we need a theory of consciousness. And scholars are now beginning to be, there's this one gentleman here, Giulio Tononi, he's a colleague of Ricci, who's one of a number of scholars who now begin to think in a very quantitative, mathematical way. He defines an equation, I'm not going to explain it, but essentially he says that consciousness doesn't depend, that you can have consciousness in a brain, or you can have consciousness in a computer brain. If I take my brain and replace each of my neurons with a computer chip, this computer, Christoph, could also be conscious. It doesn't depend on the fact that it's nerve cells and muscles and axons. You could also do it out of copper wires and silicon transistors. And so we're beginning to try to understand what are the principal the principal mathematical, logical, empirical conditions to be met for any system to be conscious, whether it's a human brain, or whether it's a fetus, or whether it's the internet. And this will allow us, these sorts of theories, at least in principle, will begin to allow us to measure consciousness, to build a conscious-o-meter, a consciousness meter, that we can test in patients like this. So this is a patient like Terry Scheibo. I want to test, does this patient have consciousness right now, but is unable to communicate because of brain injury?
This is a brain dead patient, yeah?
Yeah, this is one of these patients. I want to know, the patient is alive. Is the patient really experienced something, but cannot tell me because she can't talk?
So the vegetative state contained there.
Yes. And this theory should tell us, is this guy, this is a worm, this is the best studied biological creature on the planet, a worm. Is this guy conscious? Mice, most people study mice in laboratories. It's a bee conscious, this is a human brain, but then what about little robots or future iPhones, or this is a depiction of the internet, which is now as complex as a human brain. And so I wanted it to end with this, that we're now beginning to construct theories that tell us what is really the necessary and sufficient requirement for any system to be conscious. A human brain, an animal brain, a fetus, a patient, all of those cases.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you very much. So we end with the possibility of not only human consciousness, but really machine consciousness. As long as a sufficient complexity is there, why not? And I think this is a very serious position by many, many scientists and engineers. It should not be dismissed. And as technology develops, I agree, Christoph, really this will become a deep and important question. We already have Siri on our iPhones, right? She talks back to us. So we'd like to exchange. Shake your hand if it's on you.
Thank you.
Can you squeeze by?
Very nice.
Very fine. Mathieu Ricard.
So, from time to time in Mind and Life, I happen to have the strange task of speaking about the Buddhist position in front of His Holiness. Of course, I'm not addressing myself to His Holiness. I'm sort of sometimes like passing exam. But today it's even worse because I'm passing exam in front of 10,000 extremely learned scholars. So it seems quite strange. But nevertheless, I will try my best not to be a disgrace to the Buddhist teachings. So, first of all, I want to remind what His Holiness mentioned on many occasions, the context of the Buddhist position. Like the Buddha, through investigation, and we believe in through many lifetimes, came to refine his insight, understanding, trying to investigate the nature of reality, the nature of the mind, the nature of experience. So at some point, it is said that the Buddha Shakyamuni, sort of every aspect of mental confusion about the nature of reality, he completely bridged the gap between the way things appear and the way things are, so a valid cognition of reality, of consciousness. So that's what we call enlightenment. So now out of that, of course, the Buddhas began to say that what the vision or the truth that he had found was so deep, so profound, that it was almost impossible to express in words. So he felt that how can this be communicated? Nevertheless, through circumstances, the Buddha taught. So now his teaching is not like, here's the truth, take it or leave it. It's more like a roadmap. This is what I have found. Now, I show you the path. It's up to you to travel it, but here is a road map. If you follow on those steps, and you can verify them step by step, this is the kind of understanding which I have reached. So therefore, it is not some kind of truth that we have to go to blind belief that I can never reach there, but I must believe it. And not only that, but in the course of traveling with that map, he repeatedly said, you must verify it by yourself, and he gave examples like examining a piece of gold. You don't just take for granted that this is gold. You rub it, you melt it, you beat it, and it has all the characteristics of gold. This is yes, this is gold. So this is the process of the Buddhist inquiry. But of course, right now, we don't have the full direct capacity to see things in the way that the Buddha sees with his wisdom. It's possible. We have a tendency to trust that his experience is valid. We have the way to get through that, but we can't exactly see things in the same way. So therefore, today, I want to try to approach the notion of consciousness from three perspectives. First, the Buddhist view of consciousness from like a logical or philosophical perspective, according to the Buddha's teaching. And then the second part is more experiential, bringing the first person to its ultimate point, experience. And the third part will be examining what would be the fact that could be open to investigations that could go one way or the other about bringing some evidence that whether consciousness is or not 100% linked with the brain. So,
100%.
Correct.
So in other way, what kind of phenomena that, if they are true, that could not be explained with this view that consciousness is nothing but a brain embedded in a body and a body embedded in the world. So in the course of doing that, as you mentioned, Your Holiness, there's three different methods. One is direct recognition of reality through our sense. One is inference. And the third one in Buddhist teaching is valid testimony, so that we trust until proven wrong that someone who is reliable has told the truth. Then we have, for the time being, we base our assumption on that. So, so now from the Buddhist perspective, I think both for consciousness and for the phenomenal world, compared to other traditions, there's always this idea of where did things come from? How did this begin? So we are ready to say, well, 13.7 billion years, there's the Big Bang, but it has to begin somewhere. It cannot be there. But even a Western logician and philosopher said there is no real flaw in the notion of beginningless, no beginning. There's only a very big difficulty in imagination. We cannot imagine that. On the other hand, the idea of a first cause, that there was nothing, and due to something that who knows what, nothing becomes something, that's a huge problem. As we know, the Buddhist philosophy has examined that up and down and said, many, many arguments, which I'm not going to talk about here, but basically, in short, in the Bodhicharyavatara, it says 1 million causes cannot bring to existence something that doesn't exist at all. So, but in the same way, 1 million causes cannot make a phenomena that is appearing to become nothing. It can transform itself, it can do all kinds of things, but it's just the same problem as coming from nothing and going into nothingness. So now, basically, we accept that in some way in the terms of the material world, what we call the material world. If we go down, 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 we may come to particles, we may come to the quantum vacuum, we may come to quarks, we may come to superstrings, but in any case, at some point, it is there. In Tibetan, we call chöni. It's the nature of things. They are phenomena. So there was a famous Western philosopher called Leibniz. He says, why there is something rather than nothing, unless we bring God or something, we just have to say, well, the phenomena are there. So in Buddhism, we say because of everything come from a preceding cause, there cannot be a true beginning. But that doesn't stop there, because usually when we say how this began, the solid, we believe that how this solid, truly existing phenomenal world exists. But in Buddhism, we don't have that problem, because as was explained by Geshe-la, when we fully investigate those phenomena, we come to the conclusion that yes, they appear, but that's all we can say. They are devoid of autonomous, intrinsic, solid existence. They don't exist in their own. So already we don't start with the idea, here's the solid universe, and how does consciousness comes out of that. So we start from the idea phenomena occur, they are devoid of intrinsic existence. So now, what we call dualism, like Descartes was the ultimate dualistic. There's a solid world, and there is some kind of undefinable, immaterial consciousness that is so completely different. And how those two can relate, he had a lot of ideas, but certainly not good ones. So this is irreconcilable. Then there is the way to reduce that duality is to say, oh, there's only solid matter, and consciousness is a special property of matter. As you already mentioned, the Charvakas had the same idea. They say consciousness comes out of matter just like fermentation brings rise to alcohol or something like that. So a property of matter. So Buddhism has been often accused also to being a dualistic, solid universe and immaterial matter. But truly we don't have that problem, because in fact, instead of them being only matter, there is actually two phenomena that for the time being, like this iPhone seems to be not too conscious, and beings, sentient beings, which have sentience. But there is no such strong separation, because ultimately, if you go deep in the analysis, both are devoid of ultimately intrinsic existence.
Devoid of meba, absent and empty of non.
So there are Buddhist schools like the Sampa, the Shittamatra, which say there's nothing but consciousness, but ultimately this luminous, non-dual consciousness is existent. And then Madhyamika came and says even that is devoid of intrinsic existence. So we have actually two kinds of phenomena, one which seems not to be able of know itself or have any sentience. That's why we call the mind luminous, because it's luminous like a torchlight. I can see the outer phenomena, I can see my own phenomena. This glass seems to be pretty dark in terms of cognition. Seems to be quite zero, but who knows? So there's different qualia, but neither are intrinsic existence. So now in the same way, so now Buddhists say, well, now everything works with the law of cause and effect. This thing didn't come out of nowhere. If you put a seed of rice, it's not going to give wheat. No elephant is going to appear in the middle of the sky. So things don't come without cause. And if they are caused, they don't come like completely randomly. They are a community of nature between the cause and its effect. So of course, in the long course of events, things transform slowly, become more and more complex. But if you see two minute consecutive instants, one after the other, the immediately preceding instant of consciousness, we say logically it should have the same nature. It should be triggered by a moment of consciousness, not by something that is totally inanimate. Suddenly this kind of spark comes in and it becomes conscious. So that's why we had this idea of a continuum that, as you pointed the other day, is not just like a linear multiple instant, but a kind of whole structure. And in ordinary way, but doesn't imply, from Buddhist perspective, a core, separate self, but a continuum of dynamic, continuum of experience that we can just give a name of a person or a consciousness, though it is just this structure of continuous experience that goes on. And we have this idea that just, we gave the example of the phenomenal world, it cannot have a first cause coming out of simply nothing at all. It has some preceding cause. So it is also the same notion of beginningless, and it cannot end. So now, in terms of consciousness, as Jonas mentioned, we have to see, we distinguish different levels. We say gross, subtle, and more subtle, just names. And it's not three different streams of consciousness, it's just different aspects of more essential and, let's say, superficial. So what we call the gross aspect of consciousness, that's the movement of thoughts, recollections, emotions, imagination, what we do when we perceive something, and we know that we can correlate very precisely with brain activity, and if you knock someone on the head, that's gone for a certain time. But now, the idea of this continuum that has a kind of history, like a river, the Ganges River, there's no entity, the Ganges, there's no small head that comes and says, I am the Ganges, but there's a continuum which is not the same as the Mississippi or some other rivers. So we can give it a name, and it has some kind of history that's different from another one. So that's the history of the person or the continuum. So this is a slightly more subtle idea. And then there is the very, very basic, fundamental quality of what we call luminous that distinguish it from something that has zero cognitive faculty. So that very, very is below every single possible other level. Without that, there will be no recollection, there will be no discursive thoughts, there will be no perception of the outside, perception of the inside, again, nothing. So that, in the same way that you could knock down the gross consciousness, there's nothing to knock down that primordial level because it is a primary phenomena, and knock down that is bringing something into nothingness. So it's like knocking down the phenomenal world. You can't do that. So there's this idea of beginningless and endlessness of that continuum. So that basically, I think, if I'm not wrong, the fundamental of the Buddhist approach. Something that neither the world nor the consciousness is endowed with ultimate existence. They cannot have they don't have a true beginning, but relatively they are beginningless and they can be endless. So I think in a very simple way, unless I'm wrong, this is for the position of Buddhism. Now the second part is the more like experiential. Meditators, philosophers sits around, and meditators sits a lot, not around, but on the spot. So now, we saw with quantum physics that it is difficult for ordinary mind to think that there's possibly no intrinsic existence. Now we don't feel comfortable that some philosophers say, well, when I kick a stone with my feet, I feel pain. Or this thing, tell me it doesn't exist. That's nonsense. So this idea that we could explain the whole world of particles without thinking of particles, quantum vacuum, and in a way that is devoid of intrinsic existence is unsettling, right? But nevertheless,
unsettling, material.
So because we are used to reality. So often the case that even physicists, I think Michel says that often, they speak of quantum physics, but sometimes they go back to classical physics, and they go back and forth because it is more comfortable. They want to be a realist in the end. Still, this must exist somewhere in a true solid form. So now I want to, in the same way that if we do pure quantum physics, I want to do pure introspection of the phenomena of consciousness. So yes, we have the third person. I'm asleep, or I'm dreaming, or I'm thinking of something. I'm seeing red. You can, and I truly believe that in a certain number of years, every subtle phenomena, you will be able to trace it, you know, every single neuron, that's okay, no problem. But now, let's not jump from you looking at me when I go deeper and deeper, but just experience. Because after all, without experience, why should we speak of consciousness? This is nonsense. Now, we could do all that like robots, and be hardly distinguishable, and why we need consciousness? Maybe it's in 100 years, we could also have robots that do most of the things. They already clean the rooms and do all kinds of stuff. So it's coming there. So consciousness is something special. I have a conscious experience. So let's explore that from that perspective. I'm looking myself within my mind. So first I see thoughts. I see some kind of memories coming. But behind these curtains and movement of thought, there's also some kind of basic faculty of knowing. Without that, then there's nothing I could understand. So if I go deeper and deeper, and contemplative practice, and of course, even not to the extent of Buddha Shakyamuni, but genuine practitioners over the centuries, they have looked within their mind, and there are some moments where thoughts are not sort of moving that much. You know, like a sky where there is no birds passing and no clouds, this sky is there. So this pure consciousness is there. We can experience that. And you know, for very accomplished practitioner, they describe, of course I can't say for myself, but they describe this kind of pure awareness, free from concept, that is non-dual, but that is at the same time not like you are dumb. It's the most vivid of all states you could imagine. Actually, much less confused than being lost in thoughts. This is actually the most pure, vivid, clear awareness. And there are words in the teaching to try to describe this kind of clarity and presence of this pure clarity. So then, that's where you reach. Of course, you don't know even, not only you don't go to neuron, but I don't even know I have a brain until I went to Richie and Tanya's lab. I have no clue. Because I don't feel my brain.
레벨 양면 수술이요 말했을 때 세레브젤 따가치는 마도 수술 레벨 여버디 시행기 시에보다 미 근데 저 로바 나타나는 마도 수술 왜 다른 수술 레벨 여버다 하고 했어요 말았어.
So the first time I went to Richie's lab, then after that, when journalists asked me, what did they find? I said, they found I have a brain. So I was glad to learn that. So what I reach really is pure experience. And there, just as Leibniz was stuck, why there is something rather than nothing, that's just there. I cannot say why it is there or not there, but it is there. And that's nobody can deny. Okay? So in the phenomenal world, we say it's a primary phenomenon, like the equivalent of Chunyi interval. It's there. So now we can explain how it becomes more complex, but why it is there and not there, it's just there. But in Buddhist term, it is there, yet devoid of intrinsic existence. For the consciousness, we also, with the same process, done with experience, they say it is there, and therefore, I have to accept, at least from my experience, and being honest with proceeding with that same line of inquiry, that it is there. So now, measurable phenomena. Galileo mentioned, science is about measuring what can be measured, great, and make measurable what is not. So that's pretty tough, assumption. Because first there are two possibilities. Either something cannot be measured. So it could be, why not? Then you exclude it from the domain of investigation. Or second possibility, it can be measured, but in a different way.
That's right.
So mind phenomena can be measured with a mind telescope, which is the introspection.
Yes.
So it is not rulers, fMRI, and EEG, but, make measurable what is not. Measurable is my experience. So if I experience pure consciousness, it's a kind of measure of pure consciousness compared to proliferation of thoughts. So again, what is measurement? What is investigation? What is valid cognition? Science is about bridging the gap between the way things are and the way things appear. So I could have a mode of investigation that is of a mental kind, and after all, to look at the mind with the mind doesn't seem so odd. It seems pretty natural. So in that sense, since you can't deny experience, in the beginning of Christoph's book, he says, without my consciousness, there is nothing. So I like that very much because, yes, it is true. Even to speak about consciousness, even to speak about its existence, we first need consciousness. It comes before every of anything that we could ever do. In fact, it would be quite strange if consciousness didn't have some kind of existence, that something that doesn't exist try to probe its own existence. That's kind of a weird logic idea. That we go out of consciousness to examine from the outside. We can't. I mean, even in mathematics, there's some kind of theorem that sometimes you can't explain the full system unless you go out of it. So here you can't go out of consciousness to explain consciousness. You're always within consciousness. So in a way, it's a very primary phenomena. In Western culture, there's always this idea that, mostly in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that first the Creator created the material world, and out of that he brought life only to these human beings. So, poor animals were left without it. And a friend of mine can see that it's not a horse that wrote the Bible, because therefore the animals don't have consciousness and all that. But basically, matter came first. Out of that, we bring the life in it. But in Buddhism, we don't have so much that problem, because both appears and both are equally divine of intrinsic existence. So both, that's why we speak of interdependence. There's a physical system, there's a mental system. They are both dependent on each other, but we can't say that one has preeminence. If you remove completely one, the other one maybe disappear. If you remove the other one. So anyway, this co-emergence, coexistence, mutual arising dependence allows for these two continuum in a way. So I think that's basically, the philosophical position of Buddhism, and also with this notion of honest introspection while following one line of inquiry, which is pure experience. Now to conclude, just the third term, because it'll be very hard to get a clear final, decision just based on ideas. Experimenters will require experiments. So I think it is interesting to consider what kind of facts could be, if they are true, could be so that there's no way we can explain with just this idea that the consciousness is confined to the brain. So there are several, that pops up in history. One is, if it is true that people could remember past lives, and or remember past lives,
Yes.
with an element of certainty that will be beyond doubt. That, it's not fabricated, it's not so vague. I was born near a beautiful mountain or something, and then, of course, there's a house there, and so you go, there's a mountain and a house, no big deal. But if it's so precise, and you can show that there was no way that the person could have any access to that information, and it happens to be correct, if that is true, as our friend Wolfsinger said, we have a problem. So if that is true, okay, so that's one line of investigation. Why? Because in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there have been countless of those accounts. And then there's even a Western anthropologist called Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. He was not a believer, he's not a Buddhist, he's not a Christian, he's just interested because he heard of that not only in Buddhist world, but many places in the world. So he thought, well, that's at least as interesting as any other subject. So over many years, he collected 600 testimonies from Brazil, from India, from all over. Oh, there was famous cases in India with this girl called Shanti Devi. Even Gandhi was interested into that. Anyway, so then he made a very detailed list of what the child has said. How could we verify that? Was there any way that the child could know about this? Or could it be pure random? Is it the parents who made it up? So many of those 600 cases fall apart. I mean, it's either too imprecise, doesn't make anything, or just pure imagination, so they don't stand to analysis. In the end, so there is a voluminous scientific, how do you say, file, and he also wrote a book for the general public called 20 Cases that Points Towards Reincarnation. It means that, scientists, the science idea is we analyze the fact in the details, and we try to have the simplest explanation. We don't want to bring an explanation that is unnecessary, even we like it. Bring, I don't know, a creator or something. I'm nothing against that, but something that we could explain without that. So he said, well, in those 20 cases, it's so precise. There was such a distance and time and things and anyway, I would not, it would take too long to even take one example, but there are, you go, what's going on here? Well, he said, well, considering everything, the simplest explanation is that what they say was corresponding to something that they experienced, and the fact seems to be verified. So there are many cases like that, and we can see that. But of course, when something is so, out of the general thinking, people have not refuted that, but they said, well, who knows? So basically put aside. So that's one thing that could be investigated more, say, thoroughly, and who knows? Okay, one thing. The other one is probably less convincing, is what we call near-death experience. People who died, they are in a vegetative state for a while, sometimes for a few hours. They have no heartbeat and no flat EEG, but they are maintained artificially, their blood circulation and breathing. So there was a study by a Dutch cardiologist who studied 365 cases of this near-death experience, where basically the patient was in a vegetative state for some time. And that paper was published in a reasonably good medical journal called The Lancet. It's one of the two main British journals. And out of that, there was, I can't remember exactly, but 6 or 7 cases where the person after that described things that there's no way that person could have known. One case, for instance, the person was for 24 hours in this kind of no state of obvious consciousness, and he had a denture, so a nurse took the denture, put it on a tray and left. And then that nurse, when the person finally woke up, she wasn't there. And she came a few days later, and the guy said, "Where did you put my denture?" And she got shocked because she had not seen the person since he was awake. So there's things like that. So this, again, could be investigated. And if there is something serious, then we have to think. Okay, that's one possible line of investigation. The other one, go EEG, no brain waves, the person was dead unless maintained artificially. So now the third one would be about knowing someone else's mind.
Still on respiration.
Yeah, but artificial.
Yeah, artificial. Yeah.
Everything is artificial. So as respiration imagine artificially, so therefore the heart beats and is kept alive. So now the last one is about knowing people's mind, like Moshe, in a very clear, precise way that could not be explained otherwise. Of course, we can guess, what someone is thinking through his facial expression. I see Christophe very thinking that, this monk is talking real nonsense. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Well, you see, it didn't work. So I was not able to fathom Christophe's thought. Even though we have talked for several days, and we start to know each other, I made a big mistake. So 0, no Ngoshe. no clairvoyance, nothing. But you know, sometimes you can see people is amused, people is angry. You can read a lot of things, even unconsciously, though the Paul Ekman's micro-expression that lasts 30 of a second, you don't really see them, but somehow, you know, you can detect if it's in good mood or not good mood. I'm not talking about that. So there are many cases, and you know, I think probably everyone here has some stories about one of their teachers telling them something that they went, no, how could he know that? So I'm not going again to go in detail, but I want, for the sake of the process, to make a comparison, because I told that to another neuroscientist friend of ours. We said, you know, many things happens in life. Everything is random. I mean, you meet someone in the train, and you know, you have one chance in 10 millions to meet that person, but it doesn't mean anything to you. If you meet your brother in a train in South India, then suddenly you say, oh, what extraordinary coincidence. It's not coincidence. It's simply something that has like winning the lottery, but it has meaning to you, so you think it's quite extraordinary. So I will give one example of that. You know, I am sometime in Paris, not often, but several days in a year. And one day I was walking in the street, and a taxi stops, and a man which I don't know came out and said, here, he had a letter with a stamp with my name and address. I was going to post a letter for you. Here it is. So then, you know, it's kind of funny. And the same evening, my sister and I, at 3 hours interval, took the same taxi without knowing. We found out there's 14,000 taxis in Paris. So in the same day. So those, you know, people will think, oh, you know, nothing is random. There's a destiny, you know. But in fact, it's just like winning the lottery. There's nothing extraordinary in that. It's just a very rare event that was meaningful because he was going to the post office, I was working, we met, so what? It's rare, but it's nothing wrong. Now, I tell you another story which I think is different. When I was young, I know I didn't like go fishing, and I never went hunting. But one time, my uncle, you know, there was a lot of rats in his lake, and he says, why don't you go and shoot at a rat? I was 13 years old, and stupidly, so, you know, he had lake with lotus flower, and he said, why don't you shoot a rat? So I didn't think, I was 13 years old, I never hunted before.
Shoot rats?
So he told me to go and shoot the rat because all those rats are eating the flowers. Those big rats that actually came on the ship from America, so they are invaders in front. So they're eating all the French flowers. So my uncle didn't like that. So I'm at 13 years old, and I just went with that gun and shot, and the rat jumped, and I hope I missed it, but maybe surprised by the noise. So I don't know. So I hope I didn't kill. So one day, I was in my hermitage in Darjeeling when I was studying with Kangyo Rinpoche, and I thought, how could I ever have done that? It's incredible. Cannot think in place of the rat. You know, I thought, how is it possible that I could have even think of doing that, you know, when I was very young. So I thought, I must go and tell my teacher. So I went down from my hermitage. And I came in the room, and Kangyo Rinpoche was with his son, Tukupe Mawangyal, whom you know. And as I was doing prostration, they start talking and laughing. So then I came, and before I could open my mouth, Kangyo Rinpoche said, how many animals did you kill? So I went, just sort of. No, there was no lights and strange sounds, and very normal. So now, my teacher, Kangyo Rinpoche, when I met him at 20 years old, he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm a student, doing kind of scientific study, and I'm engaged in a program. I didn't know PhD, but I'm pursuing a kind of diploma. And the next year I said, you know, should I come to stay with you or finish what I'm doing? He says, finish what you do. And I told him a few things. You know, I have my mother, then she became a student. I have an uncle, a father, a sister. That's it. You know, great teachers don't ask you how you learned to ride the bicycle or how was your childhood. We never, never, never talk about my childhood. We talk about teachings and Dharma. He told me stories of the great teachers. But never asked me, what did you do this, did you do that? So one day he could decide he wants to ask me, what did you do when you were a child, but not just like that. How many animals did you kill? That doesn't make any sense. So this is different from someone who is having a letter for me, because that can be explained. That makes no sense. So now that one story, I think I could tell you 10 of those, and here we could collect them tonight. We'll have there's quite a few. So in that kind of things, frankly speaking, I have no other explanation. And so that's just to say that this kind of things happen. And Wolfsinger said, well, it happens from time to time. But from a science perspective, it's difficult because you cannot reproduce. And those great teachers, if you say, okay, you know everything, please tell me, they'll say, I know nothing. Because this idea of boasting and showing off, sometimes if the disciple opens mind for some precise reason, a teacher will show that. But not like to say, I'm going to walk in water. Some people in India say that, and when all cameramans come, you start walking in water and fall in the water. So I think, so real teacher is not boasting around about there. So that's the kind of phenomena that could be investigated. And so that's, I think, open. And again, Buddhism is not about, it must be true. Again, if we want to bridge the gap between the way things appear and the way things are, we have to be open all the way to what is reality. So there's no point of saying this is like this. We cannot deny those phenomena. At the same time, we have to be open completely to any mode of investigation, but it should be also from all sides. So that's basically the three kind of topics.
Thank you very much, Mathieu.
Wonderful.
Your Holiness, would you like to make any questions or comments concerning Mathieu's presentation?
I don't know. Perhaps I want to congratulate one French become serious Buddhist practitioner. So get some extraordinary experience. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Of course, I do not want to Kasoda to prove the Buddhist orthodoxy thinking is something right. I never do that. But actually, I also met two Indian girls. One about 4-year-old, one 6-year-old. They also was the memory about past life. Very clear. So local newspaper reported that. So as soon as I saw that, I sent someone to thorough investigation about that. Then eventually I met both of them. Their memory about their immediate past life, so clear. The case of this 4-year-old sort of girl, her sort of past life also one student, one girl. So at a young age, both cases, young age is some accidentally she died. So therefore, that is the 4-year-old girl. As a result of so sort of precise memory about past life, house and name of the parent and relatives, all these things. So then the previous life's parent, still alive, they also accepted that girl is their daughter. So that girl, 4 parents. So although I would like to investigate continuously, but some way, somehow, we didn't sort of follow that. So just last year, I reminded to some people if possible, you should do because of that, make contact,
to follow
and then investigate. And then among Tibetan, there are, as far as I know, you see, I think few of them, actually, at young age, have a very clear memory of past life. But these cases, eventually they grow up everywhere.
As they grow up,
You see, that memory become vague and vague, vague, eventually disappear. That, I think, explanation, my sort of explanation is the memory about sort of the past life, not carried by this sort of the genes already. Only, you see, the previous sort of mind. So mind also, you see, those mind which, grosser level of mind, which heavily or entirely depend on the brain. Then you see new brain. So otherwise, so those sort of memory you see carried by deeper level of mind. So therefore, the new life, the physical growth, these sort of because of the grosser level of mind, which based on physical sort of thing, now becoming stronger, stronger, stronger. So the traces of previous lives then gradually disappear. Unless you put some effort through meditation, the subdue the grosser level of mind, because of dissolve grosser level of mind, then the more grosser level mind subdue, the subtle mind become active. So some cases, you see, through meditation, then during that period, some memory about past life. I met some people. These are not my experience. I have nothing, just a zero. This is one thing. Then about the knowing,
the clairvoyance.
Yes.
Of course, I'm not sort of boasting my sort of my tutor, the elder tutor. Number of cases, sometimes I was just seeking sort of his advice or suggestion. Number of occasions, his suggestion become very correct. When I ask the suggestion, looks because of that unrealistic, but eventually become very clear. Since you see, of course, at the because of the early part, he always very reserved.
Stern.
I quite frightened.
Frightened. He was stern.
He never sort of tell jokes or these things, unlike a junior tutor. So then gradually, you see, we become very, very sort of close, into intimacy. So then, because of that, one day I asked him, "Oh, it seems, you see, you know, so His Holiness once shared with him that it seems that you have some capacity for kind of clairvoyance." And he, we is a very close friend. So then he mentioned, "Oh yes, sometimes it happened that." He mentioned, he admitted it. So that's my own experience. So these phenomena, yes, and then is after death, the body remain, as I already mentioned. You see, these things can explain only on the concept of subtle mind. The subtle mind is essentially completely separate, independent from this body. So, brain specialists, no possibility to investigate that.
Buddhist business. Buddhist business.
Buddhist business, yes, Buddhist business. And also, you see, Hindus, some sort of, when we say, you see, Hinduism, there are many
different kinds,
different sort of the school of thought. So many of them, you see, the same sort of belief, same view. rebirth theory. So like that. Then also, no, I don't think. Okay. So
Your
this is my-
Holiness, yes.
Oh?
I mean, I think you touched on an important point here, though. Many important points, of course, but one in particular. You know, the study in Western science of the brain as a third-person object of research, the way we've heard from Tanya Singer and Richie Davidson and many other scientists that you've heard, is possible by virtue of the fact that it is an object. The subtle mind, it would seem to me, can never be an object. And so that would then mean that one would only have access to the subtle mind as the first person experience, the subjective experience of memory of a past life, clairvoyant perception, whatever those phenomena might be. So that would mean that the proof, if you will, or the conviction that there is a subtle mind and that these are true memories would lie within the subjective individual experience that I might have or you might have. Then there must be a different form of validation, of showing that it's true.
Validation. The turn name validation. Validation.
Yes, a different form of validation.
Validation.
Yeah, that many monks or many meditants come to not the same experience, but to a similar one for them. Yeah, so that you have an agreement that this is possible, born out of the experience of many. But it makes it really difficult for a third-person science to be developed. I'd like to...
then I 가서 당에 negative storage 라고 있다. Negative story one.
So a sort of a counterexample story. Yeah.
One time, one American gentleman, my friend, he actually is, I think, engineer, very brilliant. Also, you see, showing interest about Indian spirituality, including Buddhism. Then you see, sometimes he claims he also have the ability to know others' mind. So then, one day, I set up some thought, that very moment. And then I asked him, what is my mind? What is my thought? And he mentioned something totally wrong. But I didn't tell that. Oh, nice, very nice. That's all.
You're very polite.
Oh?
You're very polite to your guests,
Polite.
even to the Americans.
So, about this spiritual practitioner or spiritual masters, also there is danger. You see, hypocrisy. Right? Oh, we really need the long period investigation. As scientists sort of investigate about matter, we also need to investigate the person who called himself or herself some spiritual master or something. We must investigate. Otherwise, easily, you see, they deceived, yes. Right.
I'd like to open the
Yes.
conversation up to others. If you'd like to make a comment, please remember that there's microphones for those who do not have the headsets. Christoph.
So the subtle mind is only available to the subtle mind is only available to trained investigator. It's not available to normal people like me or to animals.
No, that's actually sources of consciousness. Ultimate sources of consciousness is that subtle mind, subtle consciousness of mind. So that continuation, that's as you mentioned, no beginning. The main reason, that also you see, momentarily changing. So that is the reason it must causes. Among the causes, substantial causes, and cooperative causes. So cooperative causes like eye consciousness, the eye organs are cooperative causes. But substitutional causes is continuation of consciousness. So therefore, the human mind, cooperative causes the human body, but the luminosity,
The luminosity, the
Luminosity.
luminous
awareness, the ability of awareness is the quality of mental consciousness. So that must come similar causes at the time of conception. Right. Conception. Actually, you see, I want to know, you see, at the conception, at the mixing semen and the blood, egg. So can you say 100%, as soon as you see these two things mixed, their life 100% sure will develop?
No.
Or sometimes may not.
No.
Sometimes may not.
Sometimes
Or
not.
then
Sometimes not.
it creates one question. There must be some third factor. So physically, same case, mixed. No other defection, right?
defects.
But it's the same sort of condition. Sometimes it eventually rotten or something, right? Some you see, then develop
Life.
life. So in that case, the third factor. That's I think those sort of school of thought is who have the concept of rebirth. There's consciousness enter, then life start. Now here consciousness, different level of consciousness, the subtle consciousness, the previous life, at the time of death, all grosser level of consciousness dissolved. So only the subtle consciousness, most inner subtle consciousness remain. That depart from this body, and another intermediate state body, not like this solid body, but very light body, have you see these sensorial experiences. Then when you see the opportunity come, they here yesterday Kishla you see mentioned karma. Karma also is a very important sort of factor. But another factor is desire. At the time of death, dala chawa.
Attachment to self.
Lul chawa, dala chawa.
So attachment to death, attachment to embodied existence.
So that leads seeking one new body. Then what kind of body? A new body. Now karma involved. So
one cannot even from the Buddhist point of view attribute to karma the simple natural process of birth being followed by another birth. That cannot be attributed to karma.
Here I make very clear. That the semi pembudu trade, corporate guilt and embrace, Carla, and a chuma, seven nobody, so guilt and chumores, guilt and nobody of courage, I make guilt and chumores. Darwin gets crescendo.
So, for example, there's a very explicit statement in Shantideva's text, which is a 7th to 8th century Buddhist thinker, where he talks about how, if you look at the origination of things, the fact that diversity of the things that we see in the world can only be understood in terms of their own corresponding causes and conditions. And it's, very similar to the kind of evolutionary kind of idea, that there's nothing to do with karma.
So then, there are the
and then, however, he specifies that when it comes to experience of pain and pleasure, happiness and suffering, there karma plays a role in the causal process.
So experience is part of mind, mental experience. So it is sort of substantial cause must be something connected with mind. So karma theory now here involved. So in any way, so that's the reason the mental substantial cause must be similar nature. The matter's substantial cause must be same nature at the beginning of Big Bang, even before. Today, our sort of body's ultimate substantial sort of causes, it is continuation, must be before Big Bang.
Big Bang.
And another Big Bang, beginningless.
So I guess where as a scientist I would have profound difficulty is with two ideas. One is the idea of...
I usually make sort of addition. Scientists up to now
Science
should not say scientist. Okay. Another sort of century, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, this scientific thinking, this scientific mind, maybe you see differently.
Yeah.
Quite possible. So science has this ability, we never accept anything as absolute, so we constantly change and revive as better data becomes available. But right now, science has no way of explaining how... So the subtle mind is one thing, but how memories from my previous life can be... You die, that's it, you're dead, you're gone. Your brain is dissolved into its constituent atoms. How can individual memories that we believe are coded in the brain, how can they survive the death of the brain? We have no ways to explain that. For us right now, it's magic. It's like this cartoon where you have now a miracle happens, and essentially my memory is transformed to hyperspace, and then a child that's born 10 years from now has my memories. We have no way to explain it. I mean, for us, it's pure magic. And the other problem is the idea for scientists is the idea of karma, that there is this cause that...
There's nothing mysterious. It's the law of cause and effect applied to conscious events like hatred, generosity, and the result in terms of happiness and suffering. So it's just a particular application of the law of cause and effect. Right. It's not something separate, like a destiny that some creator decided that you should be happy or unhappy. But the growth of flowers have nothing to do with my happiness and suffering, unless that flower means a lot to me. But otherwise, anger, jealousy, there's a cause, it leads to suffering. So that accumulation of that over time as karmic result, but they are not confined in the next 10 minutes, they go much longer.
Okay, so Tanya would like to chime in.
I think the best thing, as religious faith, from the Buddhist viewpoint, or even within Buddhist school of thought, there's some school of thought, you see they found contradiction in some other sort of school of thought. But that does not mean that other sort of school of thought must eliminate. No. It will remain. To some people, that school of thought is more helpful. Clear. So we must respect. Although their view not fit, not suitable to someone, but that does not mean you shouldn't deny about that. So similarly, religion, those who are Judo-Christians or tradition and Islam, all these creator, from the Buddhist viewpoint, there is contradiction. But that does not mean that should change. Never. It worked. So like science also, I think the science on within the sort of material thing, say these sort of because of the mysterious things, not necessary to involve.
Not necessarily to fall within the scope of scientific inquiry. Yeah.
So as far as up to date sort of scientific way, certain sort of limitation. So okay, you carry that. And some sort of mysterious things happen, then I usually telling you some my Christian friend. I think I mentioned before or not.
Yes,
the Buddhist business society.
Yeah, it's
Song.
Oh, so like that. So you can say, oh, that's your Buddhist business. Don't bring in our sort of laboratory. Okay, like that.
Can I have a question
And
to
also, you
Christoph?
see,
Pardon me.
we Buddhist.
I want a question.
Oh,
So Jimpa would like actually to say something directly to this
Christoph,
issue?
no. I have a question for Christoph when things...
When things calm down.
yeah.
All right. Okay. So first Tanya then.
His Holiness, I have a question of clarification. Yesterday we heard 2 times that there is apparently also the notion in Buddhism then that energy is bound to mind, and that through this fluidity there is some combination of material and mind always going together. And now you said there is a stream of consciousness which is always there. And then you said there is the notion of reincarnation. So that means information, concrete information needs to go away. Now in our Western mind, the idea of energy or pure consciousness, light, implies that there is not concrete information traveling, but just like pure light. So how do they
that's true.
relate?
So that's true. That they are the lungsim mo ta the shiva 참여가 누잖아요. 다 지단 shiva라고 주잖아요. 양 코로코로 셴벨룽도 와. 나 lung스는 아주 지단야 에서도 쓰기 메시다. 그 낸는지 에너지 세대기. 그래서 요 니버티 에너지 간으로 되는 거지. shiva 유지하게 되는 거지.
So that's true. So even in the gross levels of experience of consciousness, there's some element of energy and kind of mobility. And so similarly, so His Holiness, although in the text it's referred to as vayu or wind, but it's better characterized as some kind of energy. So even at the subtlemost level, yes, there is that energy.
So now, in the most subtle level of mind, also you see very similar sort of subtle level of energy. That always will go together. 제가 시바 참여관 리즈전에 디시거다 가사데 룽 아니 로와 강데 시베 차디 아니 샤오미제.
So actually sometimes text presents a metaphor, even at this subtle level, how the combination of the two works. And the energy dimension is compared to a blind person, but with very fit legs.
Blind horse.
Yeah. No.
Blind horse, by the way.
그래서 the 룽디 샤오 강대로.
그 룽디 로와
강대제.
강대.
So the energy is compared to a blind person with fit legs.
No ability knowing, but move.
And the mind dimension is compared to someone with a correct sight, but
migden.
This long.
So on grosser level, 못하대.
So it's like this paralyzed person is being carried on the back of a blind person who can walk.
나 참여관들도 뭐지?
So, but the question of Christoph and Tanya was how memory information can be carried through that lungsem, that from one life to another.
개왕하면 전부 개와 침을 내거나 아니 시두가 남시 참여가 밥 사러 와. 근데 직 템베 교인데 컨데스티가 내거나스.
세상 15코랑 간도 되고.
So it's really on the continuum itself. The memory is carried,
embedded.
The information, yeah.
다들 박자세도 박자세디다 식디 세브라스타메 소리 다 some has lot of chat 되셔디 시부들이셔 시부이 뒤니 아니 식세나 sab셔도 시부 뒤셔 그러다 자상가 시베 균지간이야 시부에 그세하는 거지 가서 진다 느시베 다 통용식도 와 자상가 야 응아망가면 시부 된다 그 수미로 와 그 톡지 말아 봐 사진에 인도산에 같은 통용목 용티거 저상 어디 뒤니베 다 레기 니베 뒤가는 소리
So
레직 사샤베 디시비시부디 가서 올다 다 교육 남시 관련 레디오.
So, in the text, there are two ways in which one can understand this transmission of information. One is understood in terms of what is referred to as imprints, vasya. This is imprints, yeah. Sometimes translated as dispositions that the experience leaves, implants on the stream of consciousness. But another way of understanding this is more in the Chandrakirti's writing, where he explains these processes purely in terms of cessation of these experiences. Just the experience has occurred, it has left some kind of trace. And
Where?
Cessation,
Where is this trace?
on this.
I don't think it's cessation. No, I don't think.
Just like a kind of a disintegration.
어때요?
Shiva.
직부 규제로 봐. 직부 규제가 있는 전에 직부 주변 내가 규제로 봐.
So, and this is the fact that things arise and disintegrate, and the disintegration itself is caused by a condition. So the the fact of disintegration is referred to as shikpa, which is a difficult concept to translate.
The disintegration due to its cause. So when disintegration materializes, that also ultimately due to cause.
Is a cause.
So it's still within the law of causality.
Causality. So one can understand the sort of the maintenance of the information in terms of just these, multitudes of disintegrations. That in some sense, one could almost see them as kind of traces of experiences that have occurred, come into being and disappeared. And since these are formless or non-material, we don't have to worry about how to fit them.
Even material.
But we do have to worry about them.
Genes and these things. You see,
So
billions of genes.
So even when it's physical, at the genetic level, you can speak about billions of them, in a small locus. So this disintegration phenomenon is...
No formless. So therefore, almost infinite. Infinite sort of some kind of again, the China the universe.
So there is that potential. When it comes into contact with the right condition, it has this ability to actualize. So in this way, all the kind of information, if you want, are carried across.
Just a minute.
So it's very
I think we just want to pause for a second to say that there are a certain set of presuppositions which the physical sciences, brain sciences and the like normally operate under, which presuppose a material substrate for everything. I think it's important to recognize that that is not the presupposition that is being held by this other community that's hosting us. And there's a subtle mind, which is an immaterial mind, and which can nonetheless carry information, carry potentially memory, has a whole architecture and dynamics to it. There's a philosophy concerning it, and it's based in their experience. That is to say, it's not something that's just simply presupposed. It's something that they make use of in order to accommodate their range of experience. Now for us, I won't include myself because actually I'm on this other side. And I think it's important.
So I think quite useful. The late Verala, when he talks, when he explained purely science, then he say, now scientist.
Put in the scientist cap.
Then you see when he talks something about some of the Buddhist concept, then he say with now Buddhist concept.
Buddhist cap.
That's I think good.
But I think it's also important to recognize that there are many things that are still even mysterious in physics. Even something as simple as gravity. It's nothing we see. The forces of gravity. Gravity is still a deep mystery. It's something which is apparent, completely obvious, and yet what it is subtle and mysterious. And I think we want to be inclusive in this regard with regards to the kind of phenomena that you're describing. Now we have a couple of other people who would like to make a comment. Richie would like to make a comment.
I have a specific question.
And Rajesh and Michelle.
Yes, a question, Jimba.
But first, I think Richie
Do you want
Are
to
you going to
comment?
change the
I have
topic
a
or-
question which might take it in a different direction.
Mine will take it in a different
Okay, so let me, let me step out of my role as interpreter and ask you a question in my own capacity, Christoph. One of the things that have really that has impressed me of your work among all the scientists, colleagues who are doing research on consciousness, is the very explicit statement that you make that any scientific explanation of consciousness cannot dismiss the sort of the key quality that characterizes what consciousness is, which is the subjective experience, what it feels like. And your whole project is built on how can we tease that primary quality of what it feels like to be experience something out to its bare minimum, and then see if we can find a brain signature for this, and then start building up. It's a kind of a foundationalist approach, from a philosophical point of view, I must admit. But on the other hand, there is something very attractive about this. And today, when you explain what you mean by consciousness, going back to this, what it likes to see red, you made the distinction between, to have consciousness, you don't need to have self-consciousness. So what I want to ask you is that generally, whether or not a process is conscious or not, at least from a philosopher's point of view, is really judged on the basis of whether or not the person can report, make a self-report. Otherwise, how do you know that you have experienced it? So, since you are denying that to be conscious doesn't require self-consciousness, and you're willing to attribute that to the animals, unlike other thinkers in the West, so how would you then define that conscious? If it is not based on, for example, we were talking about subconscious processes in the brain, it's completely opaque to the individual, but we know at the brain level something has happened and it affects the behavior, but it is not conscious because the person cannot talk about it, is not aware of it. So would you make a distinction between consciousness and awareness? And the question is, what exactly is this consciousness you're talking about if it is not defined by being able to report?
So some philosophers, I'm thinking of Ned Block, for instance, have made this difference between consciousness that's reportable, that's accessible, and pure consciousness that's not accessible to anybody else. I think fundamentally it's conscious experience, whether or not I report it, right? I had all sorts of experience last night which I didn't report to anybody, but they're still conscious experiences. And the question is there a difference between conscious experiences per se and the subset of conscious experiences that I can report upon? Because there are many very subtle things I can't even properly describe, right? The exact shape of a piece of cloth I can never describe to you in any way, right? So there might be two different, but primary is always the conscious experience.
But what about the subconscious brain processes? Would you characterize them as conscious processes?
No, because there's no, I don't, in my body, there are many things going on in my body, I have no conscious awareness whatsoever.
I think you're thinking like blind sight, where there's a behavior that might be affected even though there's no self-consciousness.
That's not consciousness.
So everything could be
Most of the things
subconscious.
in my body are not conscious. Most
But
even in my
affect your
brain are
be-
not conscious.
But affect your behavior.
But affect my behavior. I have no idea how I talk. I have a vague thought and then I have these words come pouring out of my mouth.
Or how you move your hands.
I don't know
So in
how
fact,
this
everything could be subconscious and we would not need consciousness. I mean, it could be just one step further. We all work perfectly fine without the slightest experience of consciousness.
except that we all have conscious experiences.
Yeah, that's why.
And we have to admit, right now as scientists, we do not know. So we can talk about complexity, we can say complexity begets consciousness, but finally, even if we have a mechanistic description of it, we don't know actually this magic thing that happens that converts atoms, movement of atoms into conscious experience. Correct. People say it's like the water, it's like turning the water of the brain into the wine, to use a biblical metaphor, to turn the waters of the brain into the wine of conscious experience.
Richie.
Your Holiness, I want to go back to the question of the subtle body, which you have talked about on several different occasions. sometimes it's Buddhist business, but now it seems to be spilling over a little bit into scientific business.
Now we are interfering now.
So we know from the Buddhist tradition that there are certain physical practices that are said to influence the subtle body. We also know that there are certain types of interventions like acupuncture, which are said to operate on maybe not exactly the subtle body, but energy systems which may be relevant to the subtle body. And serious Western neuroscience has begun to investigate those phenomena. There's a very rigorous beginning of research on those kind of phenomena. So if we know that physical practices can influence the subtle body, one question is whether the direction goes both ways. That is, does the subtle body influence the gross body? If the gross body can influence the subtle body, does it go both ways? Is it bidirectional? That's the first question. The second question is, you've said on several occasions that scientists can investigate the subtle body, and I guess I'm interested in Your Holiness's, why Your Holiness has that conviction that science can investigate the subtle body. Science is continuously changing. 30 years ago, people thought that there would never be a serious scientific investigation of acupuncture, for example, and now that's clearly happening. I'm curious why Your Holiness seems to have a conviction about science not being able to investigate this.
Science as it is practiced today.
I think you see, I think 20, 30 years ago, I think in the scientific sort of world, scientific sort of scientific research field, not talking about these mind or consciousness things. Now, later part of 20th century, now begin to develop interest about emotion, because now it affects brain and also physical health. So science, as the first day I mentioned, open mind. There's no limitation. So go,
expand, develop.
So as I mentioned earlier, I think end of this century, I think scientists then may say more about these deeper sort of elements or minds or experience these things.
There was a second question.
First question. Deep pleasure. Think. That's difficult to say. This moment, ordinary level, the subtle mind there, but inactive. So may not much sort of the effect on grosser level of mind or physical. Then through training, through meditation, mainly through meditation, and some other yogic sort of practice, the subtle mind becoming more active. The grosser level of mind, because of the more inactive. Then through that way, the energy or power of subtle mind, then subtle mind energy become more stronger and stronger.
More active.
More active.
More manifest.
Obvious.
Then, you see, actually, you see, control or the grosser level of feeling, all these things. So through that way, your mind can depart from this physical body and spying on these scientists, what they are doing, what they are sort of investigation. So actually, again, you see, one my friend, now he already is passed away. His mother, that person, you see, no reason to tell me lie, no, or a little bit exaggerate. No, ordinary official, monk official, his mother, just innocent,
just regular person.
He told me one time his mother, see, told I mean his children, now I'm going to sleep a bit longer, so don't disturb my body. In 1 week, sleep. After sort of
waking up,
she have sort of Hasuda. I mean, she's telling stories, such area, such things happen, because dream body separated from the grosser level of body, and actually visit using these things. Not sort of practitioner. Some cases it happen, but then Buddhists will explain, this life, not much practice, but in previous life, some sort of acquaintance with these practice. So some phenomena is there.
Thank you, Your Holiness.
So as a scientist, you see, totally denying these things, also extreme. Then immediately accept that also extreme. Wait, and so experiment. And think more sort of logical thinking.
To be truly open.
Then I think it is necessary to have sort of awareness, the measurement, or these sort of instrument is so own sort of way of investigation. There's limit. When you see in the counter mind, formless, physicalless, so we have to need more sort of experience and logical.
So that you need a different sets of measurements.
So scientists eventually, I think, become more philosopher.
Your Holiness, we've had an extremely rich and open conversation, and I think a challenging one, where we've really come to some of the most important and challenging ideas at the threshold of the new science, the science of the next decades that will be before us, where we really will be called upon to be open-minded and inclusive, and at the same time careful and rigorous with regards to our thinking. So thank you for hosting this conversation. Thank you to Christophe and to Mathieu. We will return to this same sorts of themes this afternoon with also 2 other participants as well.
Much earlier than the consciousness or mind.
Yes.
So the particle, the continuation of our brain's sort of particle, it is called a continuation. Ultimately, it's related with those particles which no mind or no consciousness, no feeling. So the most subtle level, no differences. Now, what level? The so-called consciousness, you see, I mean, what level can act as a basis of consciousness? Can you make distinction? Plant, no consciousness, because such things was lacking. We, living being, have that kind of particle, so have the ability to develop consciousness. Can you say something?
We can speculate, but the answer is right now no. Now some people, well, let me come back to that. Right now we don't know. We can say my liver is not conscious. My brain is conscious some of the time. That we would say is a fact. Why? We don't know really. We can speculate on it, but we don't really know. We think it has to do with the complexity. And so we think complex system defined in a particular way, the more complex you are, the more there is potential for consciousness. A simple system has maybe little consciousness, A more complex system has more complex consciousness, so this would be like an emergent phenomena. But this is right now speculation. We don't know for sure.
제발에 마도 셰바체도 염을 때는 구주단다 consciousness 랩도 걸 셰봉 문주버랑 삼단계를 가사코나 데티
I mean, there is an ancient, there's an ancient, let me come back to that in a second. We know that consciousness does not require behavior. We know this from patients who are catatonic, or we know this from some patients who've taken a tainted form of heroin, and then they become completely frozen. They can't move at all anymore at Stanford, frozen addicts, yet they're still conscious. We also know this ourselves in our dream state, because our brain, in an attempt to, when you're dreaming, you're running and flying, and if you live in a high-rise in America, that's not good if you act out your dream, because you would jump out of the window. So what the brain does, while it sleeps, it partially paralyzes the body. It's called an atonia, and almost all the big muscles are paralyzed except the eye movements. So the eyes you can move, but everything else is paralyzed while you're dreaming. So that tells us that you can be conscious without having behavior.
Why eye movement 같이 오리?
So why the eye movement? That's a kind of an activity.
We don't know. We don't know. It's a good question. The eyes are there. Maybe for other people to read out, we don't know. We know from patients, we heard them, I think Tanya was talking about it, or maybe Richie, some patients who have lost due to an explode, let's say soldiers who come back from, veterans who come back from Iraq, due to bomb, they have lost part of their brain that mediates emotions. So they have no affect, they're very flat, their voice, it's not modulated, there's no emotion, yet they're conscious, they can tell you about pain and pleasure. So we know, at least in these pathological cases, that you can be conscious, you can have experiences without having strong emotions. We know that this is more recent, much more recent, but we know that, so yesterday you distinguished different forms of attention, that at least the pointed attention, when I attend to something, when I look at you, but I attend to, on the corner of the eye to His Holiness, that this form of attention can be separate from consciousness.
No. Yes, okay.
Okay, so you can attend to something. So there's many experiments now where people, I'll show one where you can attend, I'll show one this afternoon, where you attend to something without seeing it. So it's invisible, you don't see it, you're not conscious of it, yet you can still attend to it. We believe that you don't need language, and nor do you need...
15 years? 15, 1-5.
15 years, yes. Some of these patients can be alive for as long as 2 decades. So these patients are called vegetative state.
So according to medical sort of...
No, they're alive because their eyes open, close, but they have no, as far as we can tell, this is now more controversial, it doesn't feel like anything to be them. So her, for example, in her case, the EEG was flat. The EEG, it was flat, irregular. And this is her brain at the right side at postmortem. It had shrunk by about half. Now, there are many of these patients. In the United States, they probably estimate between 15 and 20,000 of patients like this that are alive. They have periods when they open their eyes and periods when they close. Sometimes they may, they groan or they move, or sometimes they move their eyes. Sometimes it looks like they're smiling, like there. But there's no way to communicate with them. You can ask the patient, for example, move your eyes if you're in pain, or hold my hand, or something. And there's no way to reliably communicate. So we think many, if not all of them, it doesn't feel like anything. The consciousness is gone. Yet there's still enough brain activity left to sustain breathing or to sustain brain reflexes so that she can move and sometimes, groan. So it's important to distinguish the content of consciousness from the levels of consciousness. And the levels of consciousness, we know quite a bit about the brain mechanism. Your brain has to be excited enough in order for the nerve cells in the cortex proper, the cortex and the thalamus to fire in order for you to be conscious of something like pain or pleasure or red or green or smell. So what is it? So I tried, there are many, many speculations in the West on consciousness, many. And I've tried to just to distill out the facts that we're pretty certain we can say, where we're very confident about these facts. So we know that consciousness is associated with some complex biological networks, in particular brains, in particular human brains. Now, it's not associated with all biological networks. For instance, we all have an immune system. We have several immune systems, an innate one and an acquired one. I'm here in a new environment here in Mundgod, and there are viruses around and bacteria, and my body right now might be busy fighting off those viruses and bacteria. Yet I don't feel anything. I have no feelings in my immune system. So my immune system is working without there being any consciousness. Why? It's a very interesting question that people rarely ask. Why is my immune system not conscious? We don't know. There are, I mentioned this yesterday, my liver, very complex, very complicated metabolic networks. It's not conscious. There are 100 million neurons here in my gut. They don't seem to be conscious. So it's only some particular type of biological networks that seem to be associated, we think, with conscious activity. And the question is why? The immune system...
No.
I do not want to interfere in your presentation.
Interrupt.
But since many years, I think most subtle level particle, the particle of plant, rocks, brain, same or differences?
At the subtle level, it's probably, yeah.
Panpsychism? Is this what
No.
as
His Holiness is, from a purely physical theory point of view, at the subtlemost level, can one say that the material constitutions, the constitutive elements at the fundamental level is the same between inorganic matters like rocks on the one hand and plants and life on the other?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Now, obviously, when you say life start
model that you showed, there's nothing there about consciousness. If I look at chemistry, or I look at in my genes, the ATGC, the letters, the nucleotides in my genes, there's nothing consciousness. Yet I wake up each morning into a world that's filled with feelings. And it's not at all clear how feelings come into a physical system. This is the deep mystery. And why other system, this is also a physical system. This one here, it consists also of matter, different than this, but it's also matter, and we don't believe that this thing has feelings. It doesn't feel like anything to be an AM radio. And so the big question is, why does it not feel like something to be a radio, but it feels like something to be a brain, sometimes at least. Not in deep sleep. In deep sleep, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing. Now, I don't feel anything, just nothing. But when I awake, either in my dream, when I dream, or right now, I have feelings. And some philosophers call this the explanatory gap. On the one world is the world of physics and chemistry and biology and brains. On the other world side is my world of pains and pleasures and feelings and yearnings and memories. And we know those are linked. We'll talk about that. We know that the world of the brain is intimately linked with the world of the experience. But why and how that is, that has been the big mystery. How the first-person account relates to the third-person account. And what makes this much more difficult than studying stars, studying viruses, or studying quantum mechanics, that we believe those things don't have a first-person account. A star, we believe, doesn't feel like something to have a star, to be a star, or to be a virus, or to be an electron, yet it feels like something to be a brain. All right, so we've often heard about this scientist, 16th century Italian scientist.
내가 때부터 간다 눕조베 다 천리보다 더주망 속에 다직 셰베 땐데 정말 수진이 아니라 다 수진이 교단 레벨 춘이 도단되게 그런 지요레스 다 주나무다 명원진이 열어봤어 다 군입으로 튀고게 군이 레벨 간데서 중요보다 텔레텐 피 간데서 중요 다 디셰바잖아 제도고 요만 된자 탄이 고란레 explanatory gaps 셰베 파르동스 시절라고 그랬을람 대셰게 파르동스 지금.
So we've heard often about this scientist, one of the fathers of modern science, and the motto that we also use today is, if we can't make something measurable, then we have to make things measurable. So if we study consciousness, we have to develop tools to make them measurable. That's sort of our mantra, or maybe I shouldn't use it, our motto. Oh, this is very... So in medicine, in Western medicine and science, we distinguish two different usages of the word consciousness. One is the content of consciousness, and the other one is sort of states of consciousness or levels of consciousness. So we were talking about a state of consciousness red. When I see red, my consciousness is filled with red. Or I can have a memory, or I'm hungry, or I have my toe hurts. Those are all different states of consciousness. And we're trying to understand how do they relate to brain states. But then there's also this other thing, level or states of consciousness. Right now, we're all wide awake. Nobody's asleep, and we are conscious. And tonight, we close our eyes and we go into different states. In fact, we may wake up inside our sleep, and then we have another state of consciousness, namely the dream state. Or then we can go into deep sleep, non-REM sleep, where we believe there's very little consciousness. And this happens every day, 24 hours. Or there's also pathological forms of states of consciousness. So this is a very famous patient, Terry Schiavo. So she had her heart stood still for 20 minutes, and then she was rescued from the brink of death by the doctors. And then she lived for another 15 years, and she was alive. She had, her eyes are open, and then they're closed.
So
Including theories of consciousness have to be testable, otherwise they're not scientific theories. So that's what this approach focuses on. So okay, so I think we should look on this. That screen is dead. On this screen, that screen is dead. That's dead, and this one is it's sort of basically dead. So we just focus on this screen. This really epitomizes the problem of consciousness. What you see is red, and all of us see red. And if you're colorblind, you may see red that's slightly different depending on your exact eyes, the exact molecular constitution of your photopigment in your eye. You might see different, but you see something. And philosophers refer to this as it feels like something to see red. Above and beyond the photon that strikes my eye, that evokes electrical activity somewhere in my brain, there's this feeling associated with it, an experience, a subjective phenomenal experience. And philosophers refer to this as qualia. So here's a qualia of red. And if I have a toothache, there's a qualia of having a bad tooth. And if I remember my mother, then I have a qualia of remembering my mother and all the positive feelings that go ahead with that. Now, the belief of many, in particular the belief of my mentor, Francis Crick, was that once we understand consciousness in this very simple form, just red or blue or smell, we will have understood the problem of consciousness in general. That all the different aspects of consciousness, including self-consciousness, so the fact that I know I'm a man, I know that I'm angry, or I might be angry, or I might remember what I had this morning for breakfast, that all those different aspects are just higher elaborations upon a basic phenomena of experience. So the problem that we face as scientists is best shown here. So this is my brain. It's an egghead. I'm an egghead, a nerd, and we have elongated brain. So this is my brain in a magnetic scanner. And what I superimposed, it's difficult to see. Well, you can see it nicely on the side pictures. Is the activity, the imagined activity in my brain if I would see red. So I put those sort of those red pixels in there, and they correspond to a part of my brain that would be uniquely active if I see red. Now, in a different part of my brain would be active.
That you mentioned that this is your brain, but then you have written down the third person as it's someone else's account.
Well, so everybody here is looking at my brain from a third person. Okay, so I am a first person. I have an experience. Now, all of you can't see my experience, but you can look at my brain. And you can take a piece of my brain and you can analyze it. You can do biochemistry, and you can put microelectrodes into my brain, as you can do sometimes with patients, and study them. Or you could put EEG, like Richie and his students, you could put EEG on my brain. So all of that is a third-person account, but only I have a first-person account. And the challenge for Western science so far has been to explain how does the first-person account come about. That's the mystery. This is what we call the heart of the mind-body problem. How can physical matter, so my brain is physical matter, is subject to all the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity that we heard about. But nowhere in quantum mechanics or in relativity does it say consciousness. In none of the equation is there consciousness. If I look at the periodic table.
Today, we take up a new theme, the theme of consciousness, but perhaps it's important to remember where we've come from. We, in the first day, explored the methods of science, of reason, of observation, of experimentation. And we spoke then about the new physics, the implications of the new physics for our view of reality. We spoke about the importance of context and relationship. We also spoke about the theme of connectedness and interconnections that quantum physics, for example, showed us. We spoke about the lack of an intrinsic absolute reality, and that the context allowed for the appearance of phenomena of experience, which then science could work with at every level of subtlety. And then yesterday we spoke about the neuroscience of consciousness, the neuroscience of emotion, of meditation and mental training, the importance of neuroplasticity. And with Tanya, the biology and biochemistry, for example, that underlies also many of the processes of consciousness. And then, of course, we had the Tibetan respondent, Geshe Damdul, who with great energy and vigor challenged the materialist understanding of the brain as the sole basis of consciousness. And so we were prepared, I think, for a wonderful
It seems he disappeared.
He's disappeared. According to the laws of physics, he will reappear. But today we have the great privilege of exploring what is one of the greatest mysteries of all, the nature of consciousness, the nature of the mind. And we have two wonderful helpers in this regard. We have the California Institute of Technology, Professor Christoph Koch, who's a professor of biology and engineering at Caltech. He is also the chief scientist at the Paul Allen Institute for Brain Science, a remarkable new initiative in the Northwest in Seattle. We also have, of course, your friend and colleague Mathieu Ricard, who is known well to you, who studied cell genetics first at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, and after receiving his doctorate there has spent the last 40 years on what he calls sometimes an extended postdoc, an extended continued studies with Tibetan masters in the Himalayas. He has also been an intimate colleague and friend of the Mind and Life Institute for nearly 20 years. So Christoph will begin, and then Mathieu will follow on. So Christoph, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Your Holiness, I have the great responsibility of representing 2,300 years of Western thought on this in 1 hour. This tradition reaches back all the way to the Greeks in Western thought, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, who first thought about this, and then goes on to René Descartes, who's really the modern founder of the study of the mind and the brain, of consciousness, to Charles Darwin and Alan Turing, Albert Einstein, to my own mentor and teacher, Francis Crick. And this tradition has emphasized the empirical and the mathematical. So it uses mathematical logic as well as analysis and the empirical investigation. And so by and large, it's a physicalist, or it is a physicalist way of viewing the universe. So we try to explain everything we can using physics, using energy, space, time, matter. And maybe if we now come to the problem of consciousness, that has not really been the focus of empirical investigation until 20 years ago, maybe we have to enlarge our view of what physical reality entails. But it's this tradition that stresses the empirical querying of nature. You can think about things, but ultimately you have to test them against reality. And your theories include